It's great to be in the SEC. Thank you for tuning in to the SEC Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Warren. Week 9 in the SEC, Tennessee makes its case for the number one team in the country with its 5th top 25 win on the season, by far the best resume in college football. Before we get into it, don't forget you can always check out the accompanying article for this podcast at secrecap.com. We're available anywhere you prefer to chug your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, get notified for new episodes each week, and follow us on Twitter at SEC Recap. Man, let's get into the results. From Week 9, Arkansas defeated Auburn on the Plains 41-27. Number 1 Georgia cruised over Florida in the cocktail party 42-20. Gamecocks' time in the AP Top 25 was very short-lived. Mizzou went on the road and dampened that sparkle 23-10. Ole Miss stayed on top of the Aggies in College Station 31-28 in probably the closest SEC game of the day. But the one to rule them all was number 3 Tennessee, dominating number 19 Kentucky in an orange and black Neyland Stadium 44-6. The nightmare at Neyland, they were calling it. The SEC keeps 5 teams in the AP Top 25. Of course, those are about to basically be irrelevant on Tuesday. But Georgia stays at number 1. Tennessee jumps up, technically tied with Ohio State at number 2, although they do have more first-place votes. Alabama stays at 6, Ole Miss at 11, LSU at 15. Kentucky falls out after that butt-whooping. Standings in the East, you got at the top spot Georgia, right behind them number 2 Tennessee, followed by Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri, Florida, and Vandy. Over in the West, number 15 LSU, number 11 Ole Miss, number 6 Alabama, followed by Arkansas, Mississippi State, Auburn, and Texas A&M. I want to switch things up this week. Normally I go in and I hit the huddle. We talk about each team. We talk about the games. I want to start this week with my power rankings heading into week 10. Now, if you remember from the last couple weeks, I broke my power rankings down into tiers, 4 tiers to be exact. The top tier is elite, the handful of teams that I consider elite, and that applies to basically anyone in the country too. In the second tier, those are teams that could beat you, but could also lose by double digits if they have an off day. The third tier, look, at this point in the season, they're kind of the what you see is what you get teams. We kind of know what to expect. They're not the worst, but we know they're not going to just wow anybody on a week-to-week basis. And then at the bottom, the fourth tier, these are teams that aren't scaring anybody. Maybe they've scraped together a conference win or two, but nobody's on lookout or upset alert for these teams. So we'll start from the bottom. No surprises here, as I always like to say. Number 14, Vanderbilt. They have the fewest conference wins at 0. Nothing else to say about that, really. Then at number 13, I'm putting Auburn here. And as I'm recording this, the news is coming out that Brian Harsin has been fired right after they hired Mississippi State's athletic director away. John Cohen presumed that he's fired Harsin. They've negotiated the buyout. I actually wrote in my article that we'd have a lot more to talk about once they release Harsin. Don't know the full details, just know that it's around a $15 million buyout. But hey, Auburn fans, at least you're still above Vandy. We'll probably have more news on this later in the week. At number 12, Texas A&M. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the best offensive player besides Devon Achane, has been on the bench for this entire miserable season. I mean, seriously, where has Connor Wegman been, and why has he not even been in consideration? In one game, he throws for more yards than Johnson or King have averaged all season, and actually gave the Aggies a fighting chance in a ball game. Out of Florida, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M has to beat 2 of those to get bowl eligible, assuming they win over UMass. They could probably do it. Maybe it starts this weekend with Florida, but I'm sure a lot of fans are just wanting to get out of this season already. Coming in at the top of the bottom tier, sorry, South Carolina, you just couldn't handle the success. You just couldn't handle it. I mean, honestly, though, ranking the Gamecocks at 25 following a home win over an obviously bottom-of-the-barrel Texas A&M program was maybe a complete overreaction. I mean, there was nothing impressive in that win. The Kentucky win was gift-wrapped with a bow on top without Levis in that game. This fluky little hot streak has cooled off, and I believe going on the road to Florida in a couple weeks will actually be a better litmus test for the Gamecocks, because a win in the Swamp would be an inscrutable win over a Florida team that is down, but that's still a solid football team. They still have solid talent offensively and defensively. They just haven't put together a complete game yet. So I think a win over Florida in the Swamp would bump South Carolina up out of this bottom tier for me, and probably move Florida down into the bottom tier. They got Vandy this week. I think a win over Vandy in Florida gets them to 7-5 on the season. So you're still playing for something. All right, moving up into my third tier. What you see is what you get. Impressively, Mizzou. Now, I'm not saying Mizzou is elite or kind of way better than what we all expected. This was still a team going into this game that I consider a bad team, despite what we've kind of seen defensively from them. They're going to move up out of the bottom tier and into the third tier with a convincing road win over what was technically a number 25 AP-ranked South Carolina. There was nothing fluky or Beamer Ball-ish about this win. The Tigers just played really solid defense against a subpar offense that struggled all season to play a complete game. It's good to see Mizzou establish a team identity, even if that identity purely exists on the defensive side of the ball right now. I don't know how they're going to fare against Kentucky, although after this weekend, I'd say they may have a better shot than we expected, or Arkansas at the end of the year. But if they could steal one of those, and again, I think maybe a reeling, banged-up Kentucky at home this week is a good possibility, then they could go bowling with a win over New Mexico State. So that's a huge turnaround in the last couple of weeks for me with the Mizzou Tigers. Coming in at number 9, Florida. I'm not going to knock the Gators too much here for losing to the number 1 team in the country in the Georgia Bulldogs. The Gators made some fine defensive adjustments, and they pulled within a score at one point to make it a game before Georgia put their foot back on the gas. It's just kind of more of what we've seen from this Florida team this year. Again, I repeat, what you see is what you get. This is kind of what we've seen all season. They can probably beat all the teams ranked below them here. We'll see about South Carolina. We'll see about Texas A&M. But they're going to struggle with any team that's in the top half of the SEC. At number 8, Mississippi State. They had a bye week. Nothing else to say here. Not going to drop them. Not going to move them up. So rounding out the top of the third tier is going to be Kentucky. I've had Kentucky in that second tier until they just got absolutely blown out at Tennessee. I mean, you just can't lose like that and be considered, a true top half or above average SEC team. I'm dropping them down a tier after that 38-point blowout, which, by the way, could have been more. Kentucky's offense was just atrocious. The offensive line hasn't fixed any of their issues. If Chris Rodriguez can't run, then they have no offensive juice. And despite having a bye week and multiple games worth of film of Jalen Hyatt running wide open behind out-of-position linebackers and safeties, they still had no defensive counter for Tennessee's offense. You would think at some point the coaching staff would say, hey, look, anytime you see these 2 receivers line up like this, you follow that one and don't go for the receiver that cuts the slant route. Follow the fast one that hits all these other teams over the top 5 times a game. They couldn't do it. They couldn't Do it. So credit to Tennessee there. I think Tennessee kind of finished what South Carolina started a few weeks ago, exposing Kentucky as mid at best and proving they're just not even close to top tier in the SEC. All right, in our second tier, I'm actually going to move up Arkansas into that number 6 spot. They've really rebounded following a 3-game slump. Their run game is absolutely on fire right now, and when that gets going, the rest of this offense works so much better. It's crazy how good they can be when that run game is clicking. They are still pretty shallow defensively, so I mean, watch out. They're equally as capable of laying an egg as they are going full Sonic the Hedgehog on your ass. At the number 5 spot, Ole Miss. I know they barely handled business against a bad Texas A&M team, but they came out 4-1 in conference play. They still have that lone loss to LSU. For that reason, I still consider the Rebels a contender in just about any SEC game, but I'm not sure they're going to earn elite status this season. That could still change. That could still change. At number 4, at the top of the second tier, LSU. They're coming off a bye week. They're going to host Alabama this week, who's also coming off a bye week. Probably going to be the second best game of the weekend. Hopefully second to Tennessee at Georgia. But the Tigers have been ascending in recent weeks after that embarrassing home loss to Tennessee. They will get the opportunity to prove themselves against another elite level opponent this weekend. And maybe, just maybe, the Tigers can earn elite status. Up into our top tier, our elite tier, number 3, Alabama. Like I said, coming off a bye week, they're going to roll into Baton Rouge for a game that could prove to be the de facto SEC West title game. A couple weeks ago, I would have said that game might have been Ole Miss, Alabama, but it's looking like if LSU keeps playing the way they're playing, that game could decide the SEC West. At number 2, they had a great victory this weekend, but I can't move them into number 1, so they're staying number 2 in my power rankings, Georgia. They cruised to an easy win over the Gators. Gators have been down. They weren't able to do much. The margin of victory was solid, but it was not the most impressive given the level of competition. So if it left no doubt, number 1, staying in that number 1 spot now for the 3rd, maybe 4th week in a row, it's the Tennessee Vols. If you're not convinced, go back and watch that Kentucky game. Offense was dominant, even left some points out there. Defense was dominant. Finally saw Tennessee play complementary defense to that high-powered offense. The Vols are one of, if not the best team in the SEC, possibly the country. I think they made a strong case to be the number 1 team in the country. If you think it should be Georgia, well, that's all going to sort itself out next weekend in Athens. Let's hit the huddle.
Come on, huddle up.
Arkansas at Auburn. It was close for the first half, but in the end, it was all Razorbacks. Arkansas had 216 rushing yards in the second half. Even 2 late Auburn tutties left the Tigers short by 2 scores, 41-27. In my game of the week, I knew this game would feature the running backs, mentioned it specifically, hammered it. Rocket Sanders eclipsed 1,000 yards for the season. Tank Bigsby was also productive, but a little less so than I imagined. However, he did open up the passing game for Ashford, which I said would be critical for Auburn's success in this game. Arkansas improves to 5-3. 2-3 in conference, but they're going to end this year on a tough stretch. They have Liberty, LSU, Ole Miss at home before going to Mizzou. Auburn is a different story with the new AD coming in, Brian Harsin being fired. We're going to see what effect the coaching turnover has there. But I'm looking ahead to December, and I'm sensing some other schools hunting for some Auburn talent in that transfer portal. The Tigers unfortunately joined Vanderbilt at the bottom of the SEC, and no matter who comes into that job, they're going to have a 1 to 2 to 3 year rebuild, in my opinion, just from the sheer amount of talent they've lost. The cocktail party, Florida at number 1 Georgia in Jacksonville. The game stats speak for themselves here. There's no point in me rehashing all the numbers. You can read those for yourselves anywhere. Georgia was just better in every aspect of the game. Florida scored 17 of its 20 points in the third quarter to almost make it competitive before Georgia put its foot back on the gas and throttled the Gators 42-20 in the end. Richardson didn't have a bad day, but he was reliant on a couple of long runs from his receivers for the bulk of his 271 yards. Bennett threw 2 INTs in this game. That brings him to 3 on the season. And other stats I was looking at, he threw 29 touchdowns last year and has only thrown 9 at this point in the season. I think a lot of that is because they've been able to hammer opponents with Edwards and McIntosh, and that's what Kirby Smart just prefers to do. Georgia had some mistakes and let off the gas a little too soon, maybe looking ahead to Tennessee a little bit too early, but they're good enough and they recovered without issue. But that could cost them against a better opponent like Tennessee next weekend. For Florida, their improvement needs to be in recruiting. They have a long way to go right now to catch up with Georgia and Tennessee, who have the primetime big game on-field success and fan environments to draw in recruits. And some of the bigger news for Florida last week was Cormani McClain, highly touted cornerback, who a ton of media outlets and Florida beat reporters were basically saying was a lock for Florida, kind of shocked everybody and picked Miami. Of course, look, no offense to Gators fans, but I've been to Miami and I've been to Gainesville. If you're going to pay me, millions to pick between the two, and I'm an 18-year-old kid, well, which one do you think I'm going to pick here? At the end of the day, it's all about money. But this is, Florida's now had 6 coaches over the last decade and a half after, if you start with Spurrier and then look at the coaching turnover there. Florida's in real danger of kind of going through a slump like Tennessee did through the 2010s. Need to be really careful. Billy Napier needs to get it right, and they need to make a significant turnaround. If they could find any way to maybe win at A&M and turn the season around and win on a high note, that would go a really, really long way for just fan reaction and attitude and off-season optimism. Missouri at number 25, South Carolina. I don't even really know where to start here. I was not optimistic that this was going to be a good game. Despite coming into this game 5-2, I always felt that South Carolina was a somewhat fraudulent 5-2. And what I mean by that is looking at that record without context doesn't give you the full scope of the quality of team that South Carolina is. So many of their wins have come off of weird defensive and special teams plays, and that's just not sustainable, particularly in the SEC against better athletes and better opponents, or better schemes, as in the case of Missouri. I've openly stated how bad I believe Missouri has been in the season, and I've had them at the bottom of my power rankings through most of the year. This game was bad on bad, but I honestly believed that South Carolina was better than Mizzou and would therefore get a win at home, even if that win was ugly. Missouri has a 33 ranked defense and the number 98th ranked offense. South Carolina has a 59th ranked defense and a 62 ranked offense. Brady Cook is 73rd overall with 6 tutties and 7 INTs. Spencer Rattler is 75th overall with 5 tutties and 9 INTs. Missouri absolutely had their way with South Carolina. And despite the low score, 23-10, it was never close. They held South Carolina to 200 yards of offense and just 32 yards rushing. Guys, you have Marshawn Lloyd, one of the better running backs in the league. 32 net yards. Spencer Rattler is just nowhere near good enough to overcome that. And I'm going to hit on one more thing here. There was a lot, and I mean a lot, and there has been a lot, of blame coming from Gamecocks fans at Marcus Satterfield, the OC. And in my article, I put a link here to the Twitter query for Marcus Satterfield. And if you go in this article, again, secrecap.com/articles, week 9 recap, and just look at all of the ire and the fire Satterfield, and I can't believe Satterfield still has his job, and blame Satterfield for everything. Let me ask you this, and I want you to really listen to me here. Do you think Texas A&M's offensive problems this season are because of their offensive coordinator? It's pretty unanimous that the problem is squarely on the head coach, Jimbo Fisher's shoulders. And that's been talked about so much for several weeks now. Shane Beamer signs off on everything Marcus Satterfield does. They sit down, they go through the game plan, they game prep. Marcus Satterfield says, I want to do this. This is our scheme. And Shane Beamer okays that. And guess what? During the game, if Shane Beamer doesn't like how it's going, he can tell Marcus Satterfield, hey, change it. Do something different. Guys, that didn't happen. How many people do you really think, this is a come to Jesus moment here, how many people do you think are lined up to come be the offensive coordinator at South Carolina for Shane Beamer? I'm not sure what the love affair with Shane Beamer is all about, but it sure has Gamecocks fans pointing fingers at the wrong person, in my opinion. Number 15, Ole Miss at Texas A&M. Quinshon Judkins. That's it. That's the tweet. What a stud. 34 carries, 205 yards plus a tutty. Ole Miss gets it done 31-28. A rare offensive performance from Texas A&M, who leaned on freshman quarterback Connor Wegman. 338 yards, 4 touchdowns. It might have been the best offensive team performance this season from the Aggies. It just happened to come against a better offense in Ole Miss. Preseason, who would have thought that Florida at Texas A&M this week would be a bottom-tier SEC matchup? Aggies are a 3.5-point favorite. Finally, closing out our huddle, number 19 at number 3, Tennessee. Kentucky fans, please just hear me out through this one. I can describe the performance for each team in a single word. For Tennessee, that word is impressive. For Kentucky, that word is embarrassing. 44-6 Tennessee. Tennessee dominated in a way that it's only done once earlier this season at LSU. Defense was spectacular. They played complimentary football. They intercepted Will Levis 3 times, held him to 98 yards on 16 attempts. They held Chris Rodriguez, one of the best running backs in the league, to 64 yards. Big physical dude. He had their lone score, and they missed on the extra point. Tennessee's offense just did Tennessee offense things. They moved the ball at will on the ground and through the air. They had 177 rushing, 245 passing. They changed tempos. They put together long drives to keep Kentucky's defense on the field. It wasn't just that high-powered, fast-paced tempo. They changed it up. They're showing a full playbook this year, and their defense played complementary with them. It was just impressive from start to finish. Oh, and did I mention Jalen Hyatt setting the single-season receiving touchdown record? Icing on the cake. Icing on the cake. Kentucky. Embarrassing. For a team that still plays 1940-style football, that loves to tout its elite defense, Kentucky looked like they just took the bye week off. I mean, they had 2 weeks to prepare and game plan for Tennessee, and we still had Jalen Hyatt running wide open 10 yards behind your safeties. We even saw Tennessee lined up and ready to snap the ball before defensive linemen were even in position. All week, I watched Kentucky fans on Twitter say that Tennessee will have never faced a defense this disciplined. Please go to my article, the Week 9 recap. I included a video from Twitter from the game that was Tennessee converting on a 4th and 1 from their own 48-yard line. Hendon Hooker ran for it. He came up short of the line to gain. His lineman pulls him up, and they immediately go and get ready to snap the ball. Kentucky is like, I guess, celebrating the fact that they got a third down stop and they think Tennessee is going to bring the punt team on and they're looking to the sideline like they're going to get to substitute. And Tennessee is lined up and ready to snap the ball, and they do snap the ball before the linemen are even in position, and they just dive ahead for the first down. Mark Stoops is pissed. Look, you can talk about how good statistically your defense has been against other teams, but what I saw in this game was not an elite, disciplined defense. And if you go and watch that video, they're lucky that was just a 1-yard pickup. Jalen Hyatt had nobody on him at the bottom of your screen when they snapped that ball. He could have been at the 20 and caught a walk-in touchdown if Tennessee had felt a little more ballsy. Tennessee literally out-physicaled a Kentucky team that prides itself on being a physical football team. Here's my message to Kentucky fans, and this is serious. This is not Kentucky bashing. This is none of that, okay? The media did not do you any favors this week. The major sports media outlets were feeding you bucketfuls of BS all week because they wanted the narrative of an upset. For them, Kentucky upsetting Tennessee's dream season is a story that's going to drive a lot of clicks, a lot of views, a lot of ratings, and a whole lot of revenue. All week they fed you stories of, here's how Kentucky can upset Tennessee, and this Kentucky team is built to upset Tennessee. Tennessee's pass defense is 130th in the country, so Will Levis will have a career day. They told you for 2 straight weeks that it would be a trap game, that Kentucky was going to catch Tennessee looking ahead to Georgia. Look, I think I've made my point. They needed you to tune in, listen, read articles so they could generate ratings and revenue. This was never a good matchup for Kentucky. Why? Well, because Tennessee is legitimately good. Contrary to what you've been told, they're not a fraud, they're not a gimmick, and they're not lucky. Tennessee is just really, really good. And Kentucky learned that the hard way. That's going to do it for our huddle. Guys, before I get out of here, 2 episodes you are not going to want to miss this week. Game of the Week editions, number 6 Alabama at number 15 LSU, number 2 Tennessee at number 1 Georgia. Those are going to be out Thursday and Friday, but I've even got a bonus for you. I'm getting the band back together again. It's been a couple weeks. I gave them some off dates, some R&R, but I'm getting the band back together tomorrow. We're going to cover Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, what it means for the SEC, what the national championship implications are. Going to have the whole crew on to talk about that. That should be out Wednesday. You are not going to want to miss that. Those episodes are always a ton of fun for us, and I hope they're a ton of fun for you as well. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to the SEC Recap Podcast. If you're listening in audio form, please drop us a rating and review on Apple or Spotify. Please share it with your friends. We like to hit all the teams. We like to cover everything, like to connect with the fans. So follow us on Twitter at SEC Recap. And if you're listening on YouTube, thank you. Please smash that like, subscribe to the channel, smash that thumbs up. Let's get our subscriber numbers up. YouTube's been really good so far, and we will be on here in video form very, very soon. Guys, have a great week. Stay tuned. We've got 3 episodes coming at you this week. It's going to be awesome. I literally wake up every day excited to sit down and write and record. I will see you guys later. And as always, it's great to be in the SEC right here on the SEC Recap.